we are so used to putting blame somewhere else, which at the end of the day puts responsibility on someone else. And we are, in a sense, pre-programmed to do that because from our childhood, we're used to, whether it's parents or caretakers or teachers, educators, somebody's always sort of taking responsibility. So we are programmed to give away our power to some form of authority, to someone who knows better.
Welcome to the Teen Rockstar Entrepreneur Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Teen Rockstar Entrepreneur Podcast. We are happy that you can join us because you are so important. You guys are the reason why we do this. And today we're going to be talking about trauma, victim mentality, and how to overcome this individually and as a family. And to have this conversation, we have Helen Levine with us. Hi, Helen. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Naomi? Good to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad that we could have this conversation. Let's begin with you sharing your story, telling us a little bit about you, what you do, and why you started your calling.
Sure. So I'm Helen. I'm mostly known as the health and wealth coach. My journey, I call it, started really, I think from the moment I was born. I was a child who was always a little different. I felt things, I felt people emotions, I felt and observed everything since I was very young. And I've experienced what a lot of people would call different types of trauma. I just tend to no longer focus on that because it's what occurred, what happened to me, different circumstances, different situations that took place. But at the end of the day, I never felt that's who I am. I didn't take it on to be my identity. But it did drive me to sort of experience bouts of severe anxiety attacks and panic attacks and a slew of health issues that I struggled with. And some of it still shows up periodically because I do believe, and I always say, the healing is never just a linear, here you are, you're just healed. It used to be something that I seeked. I used to seek these healers and solutions and all these things, thinking that, okay, this one is just going to magically make it all disappear and I'll suddenly be 100%. I don't know if you can relate, but I've come to realize that healing really is a journey, and it involves different versions of you to show up and awaken. And that's what's been happening within me. So as I was healing my anxiety attacks at the time, and all the chronic health issues, it led me on this path of discovering who I am, what I was meant to do and be in this life. And so that's kind of how I became the now more of a spiritual life coach and a healer, which took me a long time to accept that identity. And I just had to evolve into it. So I had several careers, corporate careers, and through that, I was always helping people. And I remember I was a recruiter many years ago for about 15 years, and all of my clients would come to me and tell me their most private stuff, and then I would help them, and I just couldn't help but want to help people. So that was always within. And eventually, this calling, I realized, was just getting so much louder and louder. I was getting different experiences that were pushing me, nudging me, and eventually catapulting me into saying, okay, you're either doing this or we're going to give you more painful lessons. And so I surrendered. I said, okay, universe, I am ready to go all in. So I quit my job, I quit my career, and I went in to do this for a living. And then this past year, 2023, I finally wrote my book, Unhack Yourself. Well, the book was written actually over a decade, but finally I felt like it was ready to be released to the world.
Wow,
So
that's
I'm an author, healer, and a coach.
that's amazing. I've heard some details about your story. And what I find really fascinating is how you had a very challenging life, what most people would bury themselves over. And yet you managed to overcome it. And that's what I want to start by dissecting first.
Okay.
Did you always have a growth mindset? How was it that you were able to develop this mindset even when you were going through such hardships at a very young age?
I don't think I always had the growth mindset. And if I did, I certainly didn't understand it.
Right.
What I did have, I think as a child, it was always more of a connection to what I didn't understand at that time, I guess, was to the divine, to my highest self. I grew up I came here as an immigrant, as a teenager to United States, and I didn't speak any English. And I, the force of the Union, weren't allowed even to really to think that there was God or something of that sort, because if you did, you were looked upon, frowned upon, like you're a crazy person. I remember some kids in school who were from religious families and went to church, and the whole school looked, at them like they were just somebody crazy. So, because it was so ingrained into our brains that there is nothing bigger than you, that this is just, it's the country, and it's just believing like in the grounded sort of material world. It was very confusing for me because at the core, I always felt like there was something bigger. And I remember I was probably about maybe 11 or 12 when I had some experience where it's interesting that you asked me that question, and it brought me to remember that moment where I cannot remember what it was, but it was something that felt like a major struggle, that felt that had no solution, no answer. And I went to bed, and I remember thinking it that, I didn't know the words like God or spirit or anything like that, but I remember having that feeling that there's something out there and that I want to receive an answer. And believe it or not, when I woke up that morning, I received the solution, which I did not imagine was possible. And I remember having that very first initial aha moment. And I think that kind of prompted the awakening. And then the growth mindset really started to happen more probably in my 20s, when I began to really dissect my own thoughts and realizing that I was stuck in a trauma victim type mentality for way too long, because I started to hear my own story that I kept repeating to myself and to everyone else around. And it was always, oh, this happened to me and that happened to me, and poor me, and look at my life, it's so hard. And it was just life, it's hard from every direction all day long in every sentence. And I was like, hold on, but there's also this side to this story. Here I am now experiencing all these things, but I'm also learning. So I began to focus more on the lessons. And then I began to focus more on, but I survived that, and I survived that. And I turned out okay in spite of all of those things. And I was like, so something is guiding me, and somehow I'm okay in spite of all of it, right? And so it became, the focus shifted. And that's when I began to start to connect the dots. Still a little bit of partially consciously, partially unconsciously, but I began to see the patterns in how I was creating, how I felt, and how I was shifting my reality. Because even as a very poor immigrant who went through a lot of difficulties and challenges, I never focused on just that's who I am. I was shifting and experiencing life as I was evolving into who I was meant to be. And I didn't think about who is it that I'm meant to be, 10, 20 years from now. It was just simply focusing on who am I today and what is it that I'm willing to do to feel better, to do better, to be, what I mean, to become better. And that was the focus.
You said a lot in just a couple of minutes, and I want to unpack some of the things that you said, because I feel that what you went through as a child is similar to what youth are experiencing today. I realize that we're entering a society where every time secularism is becoming the norm. And normally that would not be something that would trouble me, but you just explained it in a beautiful way of what happens when we don't believe that there is anything bigger than ourselves. And instead of thinking of a creator, our government or other, institutions in society become that creator for us, because as human beings, we strive for meaning and we strive for something bigger than us. Worship is something that is ingrained in our DNA. The belief of something bigger than ourselves is something that we were born with. And by following these teachings that we have today, well, it's a little bit of self-defeating, because if we believe that we're all that is, then when we need to pick ourselves up, how do we pick ourselves up if there is nothing greater and we are broken? And I feel like that is why a lot of society feels broken today, because they don't know where to put their faith or where to go to for that strength. What I see happening today is, as we go into more of a secular society, I am seeing more depression. I'm seeing more anxiety. Now, There are several things that play a factor into this. The fact that our education system isn't giving us the executive skills that we need to be able to develop that resiliency in life. There are other factors, social media, the fact of abusing technology that a lot of youth do. So all of these things play a factor. But what I am seeing is that there is more anxiety, more depression, and more hopelessness among our youth. And so when we talk about these topics, I want parents and families to think, could any of these things be playing a role in the happiness of my child? I want to
Yeah.
pick your brain a little bit about the victim mentality. And you spoke of victim mentality and you spoke of self-awareness. This is something that I teach youth and that I hope that becomes a norm. And it's the more self-awareness that you develop, the more emotional intelligence you will have, the more you will know who you are, the more confidence you will have. It just all goes together hand in hand. So I want to ask you, how is it that you develop self-awareness? How is it that you began to take a look inward, which is so hard for us?
We are so used to putting blame somewhere else, which at the end of the day puts responsibility on someone else. And we are, in a sense, pre-programmed to do that because from our childhood, we're used to, whether it's parents or caretakers or teachers, educators, somebody's always sort of taking responsibility. So we are programmed to give away our power to some form of authority, to someone who knows better, who will tell us what to do. And then it becomes, like you said, government tells us what to do on a bigger scale. And there's the new news media that tells us also what to do. And the educational system tells us what to do. So we're constantly programmed to give away our power and to trust somebody or something outside of ourselves. And for me, the biggest thing was recognizing that I hold my own responsibility for my choices, for my decisions, for my actions. You're going to see my fur baby right there. Just
Oh,
like me.
adorable.
He's always on every podcast and show and client session and everything. He doesn't leave my side. He's my shadow. So it's very interesting that I began to see that early on. It's just, I think, who I've always been, recognizing that, oh, I'm being told what to do. And I was sort of like a nonconformist. I didn't like
Yes.
it. I didn't resonate with it. I always felt this rebellious, no, that's not my truth. That's not how I feel. But as a kid, it was beaten out of me. And
Yes.
like literally and not literally, it was just beaten out of me. And so I kind of, did not feel that connection to myself for some time because I just wasn't allowed to speak my truth or to feel my truth, essentially, even though you can't deny how somebody feels. But there was this cognitive dissonance constantly. This is how I feel, and this is what I'm told. So it was
Yes.
a deep disconnection from myself. And I think it happens to a lot of youth, especially. And that's where a lot of struggle comes in. And especially with kids and social media today, there is so much information that they're bombarded with all the time from every direction. And again, family, society, social media, regular media. And so they almost have no way to even discern who am I, where is my truth, and versus what's popular and what's common and what I'm told is the right thing and all these things. So I think if only we can teach and show and guide kids today to come back to their own power, to come back to listen to their own intuition, which they're completely unaware of a lot of times, to learn to trust that, then they would always know from early age that it's okay to be me. It's okay to feel certain things. It's okay to not be okay, which even that in itself, sometimes they struggle with. And that it's okay to recognize their own thoughts and beliefs and to accept them even if they're different from their peers and from their families. And that's how we can start to break the generational patterns and cycles of trauma and wrong, false beliefs and programs that we were born into and we're sort of pushed on us. And so we accepted them because that's what we've seen and that's what we've been told. But for me, it's been a lot of undoing
Yes.
and unbecoming and recognizing that now I'm at a place where I can choose what to do, what to choose for myself, what to decide and what to believe, and then accordingly, what to create based on that. Because we create from our beliefs, and a lot of times it's very unconscious. And so people live in a state of unconsciously co creating and manifesting things that they do not like, wondering and feeling, reverting back to the victim mentality. Oh, poor me, life is happening to me. Whereas in reality, if only they pause and realize and start to ask, what is it in me? How did I end up contributing to this reality that I've created? And then you start to really shift your focus, but really more responsibility back to yourself and recognizing that, wow, you start to connect the dots and begin to notice after a while how your beliefs led you to certain actions or inactions, how they led you to certain other beliefs and feelings, which are a lot of them negative, and create the same story over and over. And so this is how I've created the steer method that I can go into a little bit later. But it was all of these realizations and revelations that began to connect over time in my mind. And eventually, when I was coaching my clients, I realized that it was a lot of repetitive patterns, and that's how the method was born.
Yes, and what you said is so true when it comes to cognitive dissonance. And a lot of us do not understand what is actually happening, but I understand your upbringing because I had a similar upbringing. I was a little bit of a rebel as well, and it was beaten out of me. And what happens is when you're not seen, you're not soothed, you don't feel safe, you develop, like you said, that cognitive dissonance because you're living not in your reality, not in your truth. And when you're young, it's impossible for you to understand what's going on. But the way that I describe it is when I was in my late 20s, I felt like, like when you wear the white costume as a ghost costume, that you're looking through those little eyes, and it's like you
Yeah.
see the world, but you're in that costume and you're like, can anybody see me? You're like, they can't see me, but I'm here. It was that similar feeling because it's like you feel like you're out in the world, but you're hidden. And
Yeah.
it's very difficult for other people to see you, but it's very difficult for you to see yourself because when you're listening so much out there, eventually that me gets lost. And it's that intuition
Yeah.
that we're talking about, that it becomes so silent that we can't even hear it. And then that's when the fear
Yeah.
comes in because then we have doubts and we can't trust ourselves. We can't trust our own actions because we are not even aware. And so it becomes very, very difficult. What was the catalyst that made you start realizing, whoa, I'm going to stop blaming other people. Let me look at what role I played into these situations.
I think as a kid, it was a lot less conscious and purposeful. It was just something that it was innate in me, but it got more conscious in, I think, my 19, 20 years old. And also, I remember one of the first books, and she has literally been one of the biggest influences in my life. I used to say she's my guru, and the book was my Bible, was the book by Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. It literally changed a lot of my underlying programs at the core. It was this deeper awakening when I read that book that prompted me to really connect a lot of my physical health issues and emotional things to and traumas and beliefs and all these. I don't know if you've read it, but
No,
it
I
was
haven't.
definitely one of the biggest lists for me. Oh, really? Okay. So for my clients, I have it here somewhere. Oh, there it is in my giant stack of books. This was the book that literally started my deeper healing journey.
Interesting.
Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life.
I love
I
Louise
remember
Hay.
I went to deliver my daughter,
Yes?
and I brought that book with me actually because my state of mind was so in high anxiety for so
Yes.
many years that Louise Hay's affirmations were the first step that kind of showed me that I could start to reprogram myself more consciously.
Yes.
Then, later, and hundreds of books later, and through this whole self evolution journey, it was all changing my brain, physiologically and mentally and emotionally in every way possible. But this was definitely the one of the first actual books and teachings that led me to that. So I recommend for anybody who's struggling to read that book. I have recommended to a ton of my clients over the years. I just think Louise's Way was very powerful and gentle at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listen to some of her affirmations in the evening. I find it very, very relaxing. But it's so true what you're saying, because what most of us, I did not know until a few years ago, is that we are programmed the way that our brain works. From an early age, it creates patterns for everything. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if we had to remember every time we were going to tie our shoes, go to the bathroom, brush our teeth, do our hair, put our makeup, it would literally be exhausting. We would do a couple of activities a day and we'd have to go to bed, right? So all of these motor
Yeah.
functions, right, all of these patterns and habits are recorded to make our lives easier so that we could forget about that and go on learning and go on with life. What happens is all of the other patterns get rolled in there as well. All of the disserving habits that we don't want, all of the beliefs that we hear, and then we take onto ours. And that is a big concern. It concerns me with youth because of what we were speaking of earlier about the programming, and that most of us don't realize we're being programmed, and that a lot of the beliefs that we're creating that are becoming a part of our identity do not serve us. And I see this victim mentality going on and the hopelessness, and it is concerning. And it's important to understand that just like, we learn and we take in other habits because we need them as a process of our everyday lives, we also pick up other habits and beliefs that do not serve us. And so it's to develop that self-awareness so that we can be, I always say to youth, it's like become the security guard of your brain. Just like you don't let anyone in your home, right? Because you know that that person is going to destroy your home. They're going to break things in your home. They're going to do things that are going to destroy your property, make it less pleasant. Well, the same thing goes with thoughts. Just because something pops up in your head doesn't mean that you have to entertain it. It doesn't mean that it's yours. It belongs to you.
The thing is, with kids today, it's hard for them.
Yes.
It's so hard because while they want to, it's even the world of social media. It is purposefully created to be addictive. So I see it with my own kids and with their friends and how they live connected to their phones. It's
Yes.
very difficult for them. And I empathize with today's youth because their reality is not an easy one to create that space for them to be. And so it takes a kid to first become so self-aware that they're actually consciously choosing to turn off the phone, to erase certain apps. It's just not an easy world for them in that way. And so a lot of it actually comes from parents, I think, to be more supportive and helpful and to start, it's funny, a lot of my clients come to me with their kids' issues. They think like, oh, you need to work on my kid. And the
Yes.
irony is I always laugh. I'm like, we're going to work with you. And interestingly, the kids always respond energetically to the shift in their parent.
Absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
important for parents to bring that awareness to themselves too.
Yes, and what you mentioned is very true. When we're thinking, this is why I love neuroscience and I feel that knowledge is power, because when we understand what's going inside of our bodies, then we can do something about it. For most of my life, I felt a victim of my own circumstances and of the world because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand something as simple that resiliency is a muscle that you need to build. You're not born with it. And this is why a lot of us get stuck in these patterns because we think we're the problem, and understanding that our brain develops in a certain way, and that just like if you don't go to the gym, well, you're not going to get the six pack. If you don't do some exercise, if you're not into fitness, well, you're not going to get that body, that you want. Most people don't understand that the same thing happens with their mind, that you need to build all these different parts of your brain so that it is healthy and so that it is strong and so that it is resilient and so that you are able to overcome the challenges in your life. And sometimes, most of the times, we're overcoming ourselves. And so, since you mentioned your kids and you mentioned your own evolution, I want to ask you, how different was your parenting? Because what you said is so true. I'm talking about brain development, and our brain doesn't fully develop till 25. So that means that for the first 18 or 20 years, it is really important for the parents to be that prefrontal cortex, which is the last to develop and is responsible for your critical thinking skills. It's responsible for your impulsivity. And when you understand that's the last to develop, you understand why teens behave the way they do. The second thing is that as a mom, you said that you were going through your own healing journey. So I'm curious to know, how challenging was your parenting before your own healing experience, and what were the challenges that you went through, and how it improved as you healed yourself? How did your children and your relationship improve?
That's actually really profound question, and it's been a fascinating journey for me as the observer of my reality, because there's the me who's living it, and then I'm always the person who's always observing. Like, I tend to pull back and watch what is happening. I know it's not like something that a lot of people can understand, but I've always been that way since I was very young. So when I was the truly unhealed version of me, and as a young mom, it's interesting, and I share it with my kids a lot today. Now they're older, and they get things, so I'm able to speak to them sort of on an adult level. Do I wish I was the healed parent when I first brought them into this world? Sure, it would have been a very different way of bringing them up and raising them. But I did the best that I could. But I also came to realize that through raising my kids, I was also healing. They have been the biggest teachers and the biggest catalysts in my own ways of healing. As a matter of fact, it was only after my daughter was born that I had this, I call it a volcano of emotions that erupted, because my own inner child suddenly became so, just came right out and screamed to be healed, because before that I didn't quite understand. But as a mom, I suddenly saw things as a mother and as a child. And suddenly all these questions started to arise, and all these wounds started to come up that were just buried before that. Because that's what we tend to do. We don't understand. We're not given space as children a lot of times to heal or to rationalize or help. And so we just shrug it away. We pretend that it's all okay, and we move on. We don't focus and dwell on a lot of the pain, but it's still there unless we fully processed it. And so I literally saw that inner child come right out, and all the childhood wounds just came out and erupted like a giant volcano. But it was also the beginning of my deepest healing journey. And so I began to evolve as a human, because I was raising my children, and I wanted to ensure that a lot of my, not the wounds, that the experiences that I experienced, but the way that I perceived them and the way that I was left feeling, I wanted to make sure that none of that will come through in my children. And so I wanted to rewrite the patterns, that a lot of which I realized were in fact generational, were something that my mom, dad went through, experienced, and were just perpetuating the same cycles. And so it became a very purposeful awareness for me to start to rewrite the patterns consciously and to parent differently. And by far, I'm definitely not perfect, and my children will always tell you that. But I definitely wanted to make sure that I have a relationship with them where it is something that they can come to me with anything, that we can discuss anything, that it's an open communication channel, that there's a judgment-free zone. And so it's been a very fascinating way of evolving through raising my kids. And of course, today as a mom, I am a very different version of myself than I was 10 or 20 years ago when I first brought them into this world.
What about for the parents that are listening that maybe are having a little bit of a harder time dealing with that anxiety and they're feeling overwhelmed and are not being able to process it like you did? What are some tips that you could give them that they could implement in their lives so that, they can feel a little bit more in control? Because I know that what's happening to a lot of parents is because they haven't developed these skills yet themselves, because this is what we have to understand, that for our children to have this stability, we have to create it within ourselves, because children mirror their parents. They mirror the relationships of their primary caregivers. Basically, we all do. Relationships are mirrors, and that's what they're an opportunity for learning, but sometimes it can get a little bit overwhelming. So what would you recommend to those parents that are feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now?
I want to write down a few points as you're asking before I forget them. As I talk, I tend to forget things.
Yeah.
It's a really important question, actually. So thank you for raising that. And I hope that your audience truly will listen to this, because as parents, we tend to do certain things. And those are, we either are stuck in a pattern of, I am the adult, I'm the parent, I know best. And then that's like tends to create this dynamic where the children's needs and voices are ignored,
Yes.
or it's a helpless parent where it's a lot of guilt about not knowing how to show up best as a parent, and feeling insecure and uncertain. And like you said, our kids always mirror our internal world. So, number one, I would say for any parents out there, give yourself that grace. You are doing the best that you can. You're doing the best that you can with the tools that you've been given, with the experiences that you've had. So, you're not perfect. You're never going to be perfect. And it's totally okay. You do not need to be. And what I've come to realize is that one way or another, we will somehow screw up our children if we love them too much, if we don't love them enough, because at the end of the day, it's not even us screwing them up. It's every single one of us has our own perception of the reality that we experience. And I think it was Dr. Gabor Mate that said this brilliant thing I heard once, that if you show me two children growing up in the same family, same environment, they will experience completely different childhoods.
Yes.
And that really hit me so hard, because that's the truth. As a parent, you can do the best that you can, but your child will still perceive things in their own way. A lot of my clients, abandonment wound shows up for a lot of adults. And a lot of my clients would say, I was never abandoned. I never experienced abandonment. And it's very interesting, because it doesn't have to mean that you were abandoned as a child, that you were abandoned by one or both of your parents, or that something horrible happened. It could simply mean that you felt abandoned in a particular moment. Maybe your parent went to work, and you as a child felt that void and needed them and wanted them, and they were not available. It could be so many different nuances. And so it might not be something major that you as a parent do or did to your child, but rather it's something that, they took on as that experience. And so don't blame yourself for everything. You're doing the best that you can. Another thing that I noticed, and it's huge, huge, is that as parents, we always want to see our children love themselves and be there for themselves in the best way possible. But here's the kicker. How are you showing up as a parent? Are you loving yourself? Because this is the biggest mirror our children experience. And I had multiple clients where they were saying, my child exhibits these like insecurities and a lot of self-doubt and things of that nature. And as I work with the moms especially, I find that it's the underlying pattern where, are you loving yourself? Are you showing that you are secure in yourself? Or do you project your own insecurity? And while you're telling your child you're lovable, you're worthy, but you as a parent are constantly self-doubting, or you're diminishing your own worth, your children will always reflect what you project outwardly through your energy and your actions. They don't care what you say. They don't even hear it technically, because they hear the words, but it's like blah, 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 blah. And energetically, they are absorbing what you are putting out there. So for me as a mom, for instance, it was important to recognize that I was shifting into a much more confident version of myself, and I was seeing that in my kids. Versus when I lived in a lot of fear, anxiety, and self-doubt, they're reflecting that too. So even the dog, it's ironic, like
Yes.
if he sees, he looks me in the eye, straight in the eye when something is going on, and I can see it, and I laugh sometimes because it's exactly how our children are. They look at us in the eye, and then what is mommy or daddy saying through their energy? Are they scared? And if as a parent, you're like, yeah, I'm calm, I'm grounded. Watch the kids, they're immediately like, oh, it's okay, I'm okay. Versus as a parent, when we're anxious and nervous and worried and fearful, the child takes it on. A lot of our money blocks come from watching our parents' fears
Yes.
around money. A lot of our own fears about relationships come from our parents' fears. And so it's very interesting. So I know it's a long-winded answer to the question.
Well, no, it's really true. And what you were saying, like, you were talking about the abandonment. I always go back to the seen, soothe, safe, and secure because this is really important in our developmental process. And a lot of times we could feel emotionally neglected even though our parents were home. And another
Yes.
thing that you mentioned that is true is that there is no such thing as a perfect parent. You're gonna make mistakes. And you can't be the helicopter parent either, where you're going to do everything for your child or overprotect your child to make sure they're okay because you had it difficult as well. So it's really, really difficult. And I think that it's difficult for all of us in all situations to find the right balance.
Yeah.
And
And as long as you strive for that.
yes. And what you mentioned about being afraid, this is something that most parents don't understand is what you said. We think of the fake it till you make it, but when it comes to our frequency and when it comes to our energy, we can't fake it. I mean, we've all had someone that is telling us something and we're looking at them and we're like, you're like, oh yeah, this is great, but I could feel dread. I could see it in the body. We've all had those type of mixed messaging. And we might not understand it, but our body feels it. It's that subconscious level where we're speaking to each other because language is something that's new. We communicated without language before. We would see and we would perceive, and that was our intuition. And so it's there for a reason. When it comes to parenting in that sense, you can't fake it. So if you're coming from an unhappy place, your child is going to feel that. And that's why we go back to what we were saying before, that parenting is something that we have to look at ourselves and make sure that we're okay. I always think of the airplane. When you're in an airplane, they never tell you, hey, grab that mask and put it on your kid. No, they say, grab the mask, put it on yourself, make sure you're okay. And when you're okay, now put it on your children because a mom who puts it on her kids and then dies is not going to help anybody. So it's better for her to help herself, and then she's able to better take care of
And it
others.
took me many years to fully understand that one. Because again, due to programming, societal programming, conditioning, what my mom brought me up to believe, what her mom brought her up to believe, it was this giving up of yourself, and that not, taking care of yourself or loving yourself is selfish.
Yes.
And it took me so long to really deprogram myself from that very wrong, faulty belief. And also recognizing that when my kids were born, that do I really want them to feel that they shouldn't love themselves? Like this was such a huge thing for me. They deserve and need to love themselves. And so as a mother, it became a very important thing for me to teach them. But number one was by showing them. And it really not easy for me to start to reprogram myself, to show myself self-love, self-care. And interestingly, the outside world began to reflect it back at me, and the children most definitely mirror that. So it's fascinating, and it's so important, especially for moms, for many moms out there. Love yourself and give yourself that grace and realize that you are worthy not because you're a mom, but because you're human, because you are here, you are innately worthy and deserving of love, of respect, of abundance. And when you start to really connect to that essence of who you are, your children will automatically reflect it. And there is no better gift you can give to them than to show and teach them that they are lovable, that they are worthy and capable. And you cannot keep telling them that if your entire energy is saying, but I am not those things, because they will reflect that back at you and to the outside world.
Yes, absolutely. The last thing that I want to touch up on, since you're talking about parenting your children, and we've touched up on that we're seeing today a lot of victim mentality being sold, particularly to our youth. There's a lot of stuff, whether it's the racism, it's the gender, everything is being politicized, even when it comes to our body image issues. And even with therapy now, everyone is going to therapy. 42% of teens nowadays have either been or are actively going to therapy. And the reason why this concerns me is because I know from a person who struggled with her mindset that when you create that label and you keep on talking about that without giving the tools to be able to overcome it, because if we're going to be constantly be talking about our feelings and how we feel, but yet we're not given the tools to overcome these negative feelings and emotions that we're feeling, it's self-defeating in itself. And this is what we're seeing today. So as a parent, how have you been able to ride this wave with your children?
I agree with you. With therapy, it's very interesting. Now, for kids, I think it's great to be able to talk about their feelings with someone, especially a professional. And if so, as a therapist, it's really helpful if they do give them the tools to understand their emotions and to handle them and to give them tools to feel more empowered and less reactive. Because we human beings in general, unless we're very conscious and self-aware, we tend to be reactive. Teens especially, and children, they don't have a way of yet grounding in their emotions, and so they tend to be reactive. And a lot of parents who are a little bit less self-aware will also react to their children's reactiveness, which creates an unhealthy toxic dynamic. So for me, I definitely have learned over the years. I remember in the earlier stages of my healing journey and evolution, it was initially recognizing, where am I being reactive? And listen, we're all human, so you cannot be perfect. And some days are, you're stressed out and you will react, and that's okay. Again, give yourself grace for you're just walking through your human experience. But for the most part, I at least try to consciously remain, instead of being reactive, more in a state of being responding to or do something. One of the ways I remember in earlier days, I learned, I guess somewhere I must have learned it, like pause and count, to 10 and just breathe before you respond to your kid. And then you might find yourself that maybe you're overreacting, which a lot of humans tend to do. And maybe the situation doesn't even warrant that kind of a reaction. And then realize too, why is this triggering you? Is this your own inner child that's being triggered? Because a lot of parents are parenting not from the adult version of themselves, but from their unhealed inner child. And so when you're parenting as a child version of you, then obviously it's like you're clashing with your kid because you are a kid inside. But they don't understand that. So they're suffering because they think, here is my parent. And so the child then experiences pain because they're not feeling seen and heard and felt and validated. And because they don't understand that you're just a wounded child yourself. And it's not their job to understand. As parents, it's our job to show up as an adult version of ourselves.
And well, when you're speaking of this, in a way, this is how generational trauma gets passed down. And what most people now, we're becoming aware that we run 90% of our day from our subconscious. And now think of this: if your subconscious is unhealed, whatever biggest traumatic experience you had, whether that was at 12, whether that was at 16, whatever age, whenever you get triggered or wherever your nervous system is under any amount of stress, you automatically become that 12 version or that 14 or 15 or 16-year-old version of yourself. And now, would you give the wheel to a 14-year-old? No, we wouldn't. But that's what most of us do throughout our lives because we haven't learned these strategies. We haven't learned these techniques. So I love what you said about taking a deep breath. You know, this is how I started my journey. Just taking little practices throughout the day to make you more aware. So if you're feeling stressed, take that break. You know, like you said, as parents, we make mistakes. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling like, wow, I'm literally like gonna bite this kid's head off right now, say, you know what? Mom needs a timeout, and take that timeout.
Beautiful.
And there is, like you said, no shame in doing that and no shame in making mistakes. It doesn't matter how bad the mistake you made before. One thing is that you can always fix it, because you can always go to your child and say, hey, you know what I did back there? That was wrong. And there's no shame in that. And your child will love you and respect you more for doing that. It just shows that we go evolving and we go learning through our experiences, and you're teaching your child just by doing something as simple as that. So
absolutely. And you're surrendering your own ego when you're doing that. And you're operating out of love toward the child and toward yourself. And it takes courage to be able to say that as an adult, because again, as adults, many of us were brought up with the program that I'm the grown up, I know better. And, many adults I've worked with had the similar programming that I've experienced as a child, because I told you so.
oh my goodness.
Right. And so when a parent says, you do this because I told you so, that never made sense to me. And I remember when my kids were younger repeating that. And they would also question and say, but what do you mean you told me so? Except as a more conscious parent, I was able to pull back, pause, and say, oh my God, that was not my line. What do you mean I told you so? That never even resonated with me. That's so disrespectful to the kid. And so it was important to then sit down and actually explain and validate their feelings, their concern, their rationale behind things.
Absolutely. And something that you said is so true. This is something that I see with the parents that I work with. I see this debate between being a gentle parent and having that authority. And I think it stems because our generation went through that authoritarian type of parenting. Well, it was my way or the highway. And so now they feel like holding any type of authority is going to be the same of that. And I want to ask you about that, because as children, we need that guidance and we need that discipline. So how do you find that balance of still telling your children, well, you're going to have this time out, or this is your curfew, or no, you cannot do that, from nurturing and love as opposed to because I told you so and I'm the parent? How have you found that balance? Because I think that's really important for parents to understand.
Yeah, and it's still something that I go through periodically. Again, now my kids are a little bit older, so it's less that, but it's something that was always kind of like you said, finding a balance. And it's not easy all the time, and some days are harder and some struggles are harder. So first of all, it comes down to pick your battles. Where is it really worth it to stand your ground, and where can you maybe lean in a little bit and be more flexible? And then also it took me some time to really realize that our children, first of all, they want respect, but second is they deserve it because they are human just like anyone else. And so as parents often forget that, and we don't treat them with that respect, because when you treat from the authoritative place, the children push back because they feel resentful in that moment, and it makes sense. You're pushing your authority onto them, and especially if they're teenagers, they are in the place where it's totally like, whoa, it just does not resonate well. So it does take a lot of this back and forth to recognize your own dynamics in a family, and every kid is different and they will require a different approach. But also learning to really consciously learning if that's not how you've been brought up or that's not how you've been parenting, to truly accept and respect your child as a sovereign being that they are. And I really have come to realize that, and I tell that to my kids a lot, that we all have our own journey. And as a parent, I cannot live life for you. And so you will make your own mistakes, and I have to become okay with it. Is it easy for me as a mom? It's not. I don't want them to experience pain. I don't want them to experience struggle. But at the same time, it's important for me to pull back and realize that they still will, and they do have their own journey to live and experience. And I have to honor that. And the more I am learning to honor that and respect their boundaries and just let them kind of experience their own life, the more the dynamic shifts too. So it's interesting for me to kind of observe that as well.
I want the listeners to hear about the method that you developed, your STEER method, a life's work that you put together.
Okay, so the steer is what came to me, and it's really about like steering your own wheel, essentially, steering toward your own life. It's the 5 steps. So the S is the story that we all live and tell ourselves. And it's usually different kinds of story, but that tend to be story of powerlessness, of helplessness, of victim, poor me type story. So it's important to start to connect where is your story that you're repeating. And then that story leads to the T, which is the thought patterns. And they tend to be very repetitive. So for me, it was noticing my thoughts, recognizing that I was thinking certain thoughts, separating myself from that, observing the thoughts, and then realizing that I could actually change them. I could change my thoughts, would change my beliefs, and I started to rewrite my patterns. So this is what I teach all of my clients. It used to be one-on-one, now in my group programs as well. The E is the emotional component, the first E. And that's where a lot of our traumas, a lot of our unhealed emotions, a lot of our suppressed and buried emotions are. So it's going into all of that, recognizing that, bringing awareness and heal a lot of it. And generational trauma is a huge part of it. The second E is the energy, which is the highly misunderstood and often completely disregarded component, which therapy does not handle at all, which a lot of the mindset work and coaches just kind of dismiss or maybe don't fully understand because it's considered woo-woo by a lot of people. But we are energetic beings. And as such, you cannot disregard the biggest part of who you are. And so energetically, this is who we reflect to be to the outside world. And so when we heal our emotions, when we change our thoughts patterns, when we notice and change our story, our energy shifts completely. Our entire energetic alignment changes. We become a magnet to a very different reality because of the frequency that we're now vibrating on, that we're emitting. It's like radio waves. So this is what I teach that I'm so passionate about, because people can change their reality. The R is the reality that you experience, the results that you experience in your life is the steer, right? The R is what you see in your life. If you're not happy with it, you have got to reverse engineer it back through your energy, emotions, thoughts, and story. So that's the sort of short about the method. And it is powerful. And the reason why it produces such powerful results for my clients is because when you do reverse engineer all of it and change through those steps, your life inevitably changes. Your results change. You experience a very different dynamic in your relationships, whether it's parents, children, or your relationship with money, or with other people in your life, or your career. It all stems with your relationship with yourself. So that's at the core of all of it.
Yes, and what you said about stories, it's a great beginning because that is the all in all. A lot of us don't even realize the stories that we're telling ourselves. And when we get down to what is the story of me? Who do I even think I am? And we start breaking that down, we realize, wow, we do create our reality. And a lot of people don't like that because when they look around their lives and they're not happy with where they are, the last thing they want to do is accept responsibility for that. But what I always tell everyone that I speak to is, no, you have to look at it in a different way. Think of how empowering it is that that you do have control. And if you make these changes, like you said, it's a little bit of an unprogramming and a reprogramming of what's going on between your ears. And when you calibrate that, and like you said, everything is energy, everything is frequency. You know, when you think of it, everything holds a frequency. Frequency is what keeps everything together. And when you become aware of your frequency and your energy and you start lifting that state, well, you start seeing it manifest in your reality. So it's magnificent. So we're going to leave Helen's links below, but we also want to tell you that we're really excited that Helen is also going to be one of the coaches in our summer program, and she's going to be working with the parents. So we're really excited about that and excited to help you be able to make those changes that Helen has made in her life so that not only she could be happy, but create children that have the strength and the ability to go out in the world and do what it is that they're meant to do. We all, like you said, have our own unique purpose. You know, a lot of times we hold expectation, and I think that that's the hardest thing for us humans to do. And we do this with every relationship, not just with our children. We have an expectation of what we think it's going to be. And a lot of times that expectation is what prevents us from being happy.
Just that it's such a huge point that you brought up, the
Yes.
expectations, especially as parents. And for me, it's something very interesting. One of my kids is definitely the boundary pusher and has completely been changing the dynamic of and helping me as a parent, as well as my husband, to recognize how our expectations and projections were being pushed, and also realizing that our expectations, especially as parents, are not always the same that what our children's desires and goals are. And so it's important to also realize that, am I giving them that space to be? And it was a fascinating thing for me, and it is, as I'm watching this kid grow up and really teaching us a lot of life lessons. For instance, one of my kids just is, at least right now at this point, refusing to go to college. There was so many generational upbringing about beliefs that college is the one thing you must do. You know, we came from that, my husband and I both, and it was so important and it was ingrained in us. But that's not my kid's reality. And so I was, instead of judging and sort of, really pushing my agenda, I had to pull back. And it's been a beautiful experience of realizing that I can witness and observe the child's journey and being just totally okay with it and support in whatever their journey is, because it doesn't have to be my truth. My child's truth does not have to be my truth, and nor should it be, and I don't want it to be. And so the reason why so many parents feel disappointment and why so many children feel hurt is because of the expectations, which are unmet. And in reality, and I'm always teaching that to all my clients and my children, first and foremost, is you have got to live your own truth. And your truth does not have to match anybody else's, including my own. So that's a really big one, I think, for a lot of parents to realize.
Yeah, it is big. And I think it has to do with our own healing journey. A lot of parents feel that, through their children, they will get to live certain experiences that opportunities that they didn't feel they had. And because maybe they didn't have these opportunities, they don't want their children to pass them up. And so they feel very hurt and threatened when their children don't want to do this, because my goodness, I would have dreamed of having this, but that's the whole thing. That's your dream. And that's something that's very difficult. And I see this with parents, and that's why I mentioned it. And it's, once again, it goes back to the healing journey. And the more that we're able to heal those aspects within ourselves, then all of that seems to start relaxing. And then our relationships are able to flourish as a result.
Absolutely. And it's also letting go of judgments of our own and societal and projections of those judgments onto our kids, especially. So many parents even say to me, well, you're okay with this? What do you mean? How are you not pushing your child? How are you doing this? And I'm like, I am okay with it, because I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. And I do not see my children's choices as their identity. Like, for instance, education. I'm totally okay respecting my child's decision to try and find their way, both kids in whatever capacity and direction they decide, as long as it's healthy choices, as long as they're, not doing something that I'm so categorically sort of against, but otherwise, I'm giving them the space to discover themselves. Like my kids, it's their life they have to live. And so for me, I don't need to prove anything to anyone else. I don't care how I'm judged by others, never really cared. So I think it's a huge part too, is a lot of parents, I would say, ask yourself, are you pushing your beliefs and agenda onto your kids because you are afraid to look less than in someone else's eyes, because your ego may be getting hurt? So then who's the priorities? Is your kid or what somebody else thinks? That's a really
Yeah.
big one.
It's keeping up with the Joneses kind of type of thing. And it happens a lot. But
Yeah.
then you ask the most important question: who am I aiming to please? Am I aiming to please the people in my country club or in my church, or am I aiming to focus on my child and our happiness? And that is something that's really hard. Again, it goes back to the introspection and seeing, why am I feeling judged over my child's actions? Why is this so important to me? And so if you want to start taking these steps, I would suggest start with Helen's book,
Unhack
Unhack.
yourself.
I love it.
And it's
Unhack
because,
yourself.
yeah, it's because I realized that we have all been hacked.
Yes, we have.
Generationally, societally, through all those programs, our innate operating system has been hacked. And so my goal is to help people unhack themselves, deprogram from all of the things that you are not, so that who you truly are, that authentic self, can shine. And so you can actually live your life from that place rather than from somebody else's programs and beliefs.
Absolutely. And it is a deprogramming that we have to go through, and a reprogramming, because we've all been filled with programs. We're going to let you guys go with that. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Teen Rockstar Entrepreneur Podcast. And thank you, Helen, so much for all your insight. And we look forward to reading your book and to having you with us in our summer program. Have a fantastic rest of your week. We'll see you on the next episode of the Teen Rockstar Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey Rockstars, that wraps up another electrifying episode of the Teen Rockstar Entrepreneur Podcast, where we dive deep into the journeys of incredible minds shaping their destinies in the world of business, solo, and entrepreneurship. Now, before you hit that pause button, I've got some exciting news for you. If you're ready to take control of your life, eliminate anxiety, insecurity, and fear, then look no further. Head over to the teenrockstarentrepreneur.org website to grab your very own copy of the comprehensive 140-page Designer Life Blueprint Teen Workbook. This workbook isn't just a guide, it's a roadmap to unleashing your true potential. Packed with insights, exercises, and strategies, it's your key to crafting the life you've always dreamed of. A life where challenges are conquered, dreams are pursued, and happiness is your companion. So what are you waiting for? Visit teenrockstarentrepreneur.org and kickstart your journey to a life of purpose, passion, and success. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and remember, your journey is just getting started. Until next time, keep rocking and rolling towards your dreams.